Welcome to Corwin's Teacher to Teacher podcast with host Carol Pelletier Radford. Carol is an experienced classroom teacher, university educator, founder of mentoringinaction.com, and author of 4 best-selling professional books for teachers. She believes the best form of professional learning happens when teachers engage in authentic conversations and share their wisdom. In every episode, Carol and her guests share stories about pivotal moments in their careers, successful classroom strategies, and personal actions they take to minimize stress and stay healthy. The Teacher to Teacher podcast is a place to engage in authentic conversation and reflection with experienced educators. We hope these conversations will energize you, keep you inspired, and remind you why you chose to become a teacher.
Hello, welcome to the Teacher to Teacher podcast, sharing our wisdom with host Carol Radford. I am Tori Bachman, a Corwin editor and co-producer of this podcast, which we've created for teachers at all levels who are searching for practical wisdom they can use in their classrooms. We believe we're all constantly learning, and we're learning together. I am excited to introduce today's guests. We have 2 dynamic and wise educators here with Carol to share their stories and their wisdom. And I'm going to introduce to you now Matt Johnson and Traci Rizzo. Matthew Johnson is a father, husband, and 9th grade ELA and academic intervention teacher in Ann Arbor, Michigan. He blogs regularly about writing instruction and pedagogy on his own blog, MatthewMJohnson.com, and he contributes to national publications across the year. In addition, Matt is a best-selling author of 3 Corwin titles. He is the author of Flash Feedback, Responding to Student Writing Better and Faster Without Burning Out, a co-author of the book Answers to Your Biggest Questions About Teaching Middle and High School ELA, and his most recent book titled Good Grammar, Joyful and Affirming Language Lessons That Work for More Students, will be available in June of 2024, also from Corwin. Hey, Matt, welcome to Teacher to Teacher.
Hello, thanks for having me here.
Also with us today is Traci Rizzo. Traci is a 4th grade teacher and literacy specialist in Niskayuna Central Schools in New York State. Traci is in her 26th year of teaching. It's amazing. After beginning her career as a classroom teacher in Hesperia, California, Traci returned to New York, where she has taught in Glen Falls and now in Niskayuna, in both roles as classroom teacher and literacy specialist. Traci is also one of the educators who's featured in Carol's recent book, When I Started Teaching, I Wish I Had Known, Weekly Wisdom for Beginning Teachers. Hey, Traci, thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now let's settle in for what's sure to be a great conversation between 3 seasoned educators. I'll turn this back to Carol.
Thanks, Tori, and welcome, Matt and Traci. I'm really excited about this conversation because literacy and reading and working with our students so that they have lifelong skills is really important. And the purpose of this podcast is for us to kind of match up people that don't know each other, teachers who don't know each other, and have an authentic conversation, which always shows me how much alike we all are. So let's see if that happens in this case, in this podcast. So let's dive in to finding out what you're doing right now and how you ended up where you are. So Traci, let's start with you.
Well, as you mentioned before, I have been a classroom teacher and a literacy specialist for the past 20 years. I began my career as a classroom teacher in Southern California, and when I was there, had some experiences that really pushed me into wanting to learn more about the field of literacy. I currently am teaching 4th grade in New York. The beginning of the year, I was a literacy specialist and some things came up and I switched to the classroom for the second half of the year.
Did you always want to be a teacher, Traci, or was this a career change? How did that happen?
I was one of those strange people that knew what they wanted to do when they were 6, 7, 8 years old and never veered from it. I used to make my childhood friends play school, and my favorite thing to do was, of course, stand in front of them and speak to them and assign homework and correct homework for them. They put up with that.
I know. Matt's going to help us with that. We don't know if how much we really like to correct papers now, but we did when we were
No,
playing school. We thought
Yeah,
that was fun, right?
it's
that
awesome. I love that.
definitely is not, that's definitely not how I feel any longer.
Exactly. And you shifted, so you taught in the classroom, but to become a literacy specialist, what does that involve?
Well, for me, when I started my career, my first position was in a 1-2 combo classroom. So, as we know now, experienced teachers, you really need to understand the process of how children learn to read so that you can teach them properly and most efficiently how to begin to read. And I realized my first year of teaching that I did not have the knowledge that I needed from my undergraduate classes to do that effectively. I could read the pages of a manual that was given to me. But when I sat and I looked at the faces of the first and second graders, I realized this wasn't really teaching them to read. This was following a script so that they could follow along with a story in a book. So at that point, um, I sought out the friendship, professional friendship, and then personal friendship of the reading recovery teacher in the building that I was teaching. I had been eyeing her leveled library since I walked in there. And this was a great opportunity for me to get to take a look at what she had. And luckily for me, this veteran teacher was willing and eager to share everything that she knew from her background about teaching reading and her resources. And I was fascinated. I realized at that point that there was so much that I still needed to learn that I knew following my path, my educational path, and learning more about literacy and how children learn to read was my passion, was going to be my passion. And it basically was birthed from the fact that I didn't have the knowledge that I know I needed to be successful.
So thank
Um,
you for I really appreciate your honesty so that the beginning teachers listening can hear this is an experienced teacher who's saying, I don't know how to do. I can remember teaching fifth grade and not know if I had a student that didn't know how to read, what
yeah,
I would do. So this really relates to the next question I was going to ask you. So I'm going to go with that. And then Matt, hold on, I'm going to get to you. So is this a pivotal moment for you then? It looks like it kind of shifted your whole approach to what you were going to be teaching and how you ended up being a literacy specialist. So can you just give me a little bit more of that
sure,
experience?
absolutely. This was the pivotal moment of my career, and I feel fortunate that I was in the right place at the right time when I recognized it. I also feel um, thankful that I recognized it early on in my career where I was lacking, where I needed more information in order to be the best that I could be in the classroom. And the science behind reading, just from the instant that I started my master's program when I returned to New York, um, the science of reading, it just, I had more questions each time I went to class. I wanted more information. I wanted to know more. Well, what happens when this doesn't happen naturally for a child? You know, what are the steps in moving every single child forward in their literacy, no matter where they originated from in my class?
Thank you
You're
for that.
welcome.
I appreciate again the I appreciate these experiences that show up on this podcast that when we look back, those memories of how it's two roads diverged, like the Robert Frost poem, and you took that road and it has influenced the way in which you teach and the role that you play in schools and how many students you've helped. So thank you. So
Absolutely.
Matt, how does your story, let's find out about you and your pivotal moment and where you're teaching in Ann Arbor.
Yep.
And yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I'm this is my 16th year of teaching, and I'm a teacher in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And for most of the last 10 years, I was teaching mostly like junior and senior level, sort of, electives, AP, that kind of thing. But a couple of years ago, I got an opportunity to go back to my alma mater, like where I went to high school. And specifically, I was really interested at the time in working with ninth graders. Ninth grade is an incredibly pivotal year. There's a lot that I've read about how just success in ninth grade sort of leads to success throughout high school, dramatically lowers chances of dropping out and struggles and those sorts of things. And that struggling in one's freshman year, it kind of goes the opposite way. And so it had been something I've been wanting to do for a time, was actually go back and work. My career started with middle schoolers. I did middle school for my first 5 years, and I kind of wanted something in between. And so, Traci, this is kind of similar to yours, where, they're like, okay, so you'll have 4 sections of ninth grade, but then we have this academic literacy program that we're starting. We had been doing Read 180 for a long time, but they decided that they wanted to switch it. And they're like, well, you've written books on education, like, so we signed you up for that. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Okay, that's how it happens.
And it was quite a learning experience, because you show up and they're like, okay, let's talk phonics. And I'm like, I went to school for secondary education. I do not really have anything beyond a basic understanding. So it's been a really awesome, like, learning experience. It's been really cool. And it's actually been everything I've wanted it to be, in terms of, like, I've loved working with these freshmen and building out this program as well, and kind of working with, like, other reading specialists and literacy specialists, and getting to know that world has been neat. And it's still very much a work in progress. So don't ask me, ask Traci about it right now.
Okay.
Hopefully ask me about it in a few more years. But it's been really fun. And it's been cool because I have a 7-year-old daughter. So, like, kind of like I'm learning phonics as she's learning phonics and things like that.
I love it. So watching that magic, it's just magical to me to see how our students learn how to read, and they're so excited. I have a nephew, and he's 5 and he's reading, and I'm like, and one day he couldn't read, and the next day he could read.
No, it's amazing, right?
But did you
and writing was always my
Go
Oh yeah,
ahead.
I was gonna say writing was always kind of the thing I focused on. I was one of those rare English teachers who became an English language arts teacher because I loved what writing did for me, and the, kind of expressing oneself.
Right.
And so it's been really cool to and my blog is largely focused on writing instruction, as were sort of like my first kind of couple books that I did, and the one coming up. So it's been really fun to kind of go into the world of reading and to see all the connections, right? I mean, it's all connected, right? It's not.
Well, reading, writing, speaking,
Yeah.
all of the voices.
Yeah.
That's what makes the magic. Did you always want to teach though, or is this
I think quietly, yes, but like
quietly?
I fought it a little bit. I was Traci. I was not like you. Like when I enrolled in Michigan, University of Michigan, where for my undergrad, everybody around me had like these awesome like sounding majors, like molecular, biology and aerospace engineering, and I'm like, that sounds awesome, but I didn't really know what I wanted to be, and I had like 4 different majors, and I finally dropped out after my sophomore year because I was like, I don't know what I want to do, and I wasn't doing as well because I didn't really have any motivation. I
Right.
didn't know why I was there besides the fact that I was supposed to go there because I got in there. And I actually went and taught skiing out west in Colorado. I wish I had a profound reason. It looked cool. Like I saw it on a movie and it looked cool.
How we make decisions. This is
Yeah,
how we make decisions.
and I showed up and they were like, "Hey, you." We don't mean to be mean because I'm from Michigan. They're like, which is up in the mountains. They're like, for Michigan, I was a good skier, but they're like, you're not a good skier. But we can teach you to ski. You seem like you'd be a good teacher. And the first time anybody said that, so they put me with the 4-year-olds. Like I was teaching 4-year-olds every day.
Oh, I love it.
Which is not what I had envisioned in my mind when I went out there. But what was so funny is I actually had like a moment where there was this kid who was a little bit older. He was a teenager, and he was like, I hate this. I come out every year with my family, and they throw me at ski school, and they go have a blast, and I despise skiing. And I think I just listened to him, and I was like, like, okay, well, tell me more about that. And I mean, I was only 20, so yeah, we weren't that different. And finally, I was like, hey, like, they want you to go out, like, maybe my approaches will help you kind of figure this thing out. And we went out, and then for some reason, something clicked, and he really enjoyed it. And he's like, thanks. He's like, I actually think I might come back next year. And I had this moment where I'm like, if he comes back for 52 years, it just becomes a weekly thing. That's like a year of his life that's like noticeably different because he hung out with me for a day skiing. And that was kind of the moment where I was like, oh, I want to be a teacher. Like that.
It came through another avenue. It didn't come
Yeah.
through college. It came through a relationship where you were actually helping someone understand and clarify a
Yeah.
skill. Wow. And that was
Yeah. I mean,
that your pivotal moment? Would you say?
well, I don't know. I think the other, pivotal
Yeah.
moment, I can think about is that because like looking back on it, I always actually was a teacher. I was always the patrol leader, the captain of the track team, like always these roles of mentorship. Like I always enjoyed that.
Okay.
And my first 3 years of teaching were awesome, with the exception of the fact that I was working 80 or 90 hours a week. I mean, I lived in Los Angeles at the time. I got a very small, very crummy apartment a block from the beach because that's the dream, right? And
Yes,
I
that's
it,
cool.
but the problem with the dream is I wasn't living the dream. I was sitting there at my table every night, like grading papers. Every Sunday, no fun day was just spent sitting there. Like I wasn't surfing like a block away at the Pacific Ocean, right? I was doing that. So at the time, I actually left teaching. I was like, I love everything about this job. I love the challenge. I love waking up every day trying to figure out how to help kids, live a happier, better life. Like what better thing is that? But I just didn't want to do that. I didn't want that to be my life. And so like I ended up finding my way back because that was right around the time that the economy blew up and there weren't any jobs anywhere. And so I had to pay off my student loan somehow. So I ended up coming back to teaching, but when I did, I got some mentors, specifically Linda Christensen of the Oregon Writing Project, who kind of showed me that like it doesn't have to be that way. And so kind of my teaching ever since, and then when I got into writing about 5 years ago, has been about that idea of like how can you do this job well, but how can you also like like do it in the 8 to 4 Monday through
And have a
Friday.
life and still
Yeah,
be efficient and give feedback to our students. We all want to do that. But
yeah,
I think your message of living a block from the beach and not even being able to enjoy it is a powerful one. And so many of our listeners feel the same, that we aren't living the human life. Teachers we try to be perfect. I want to segue into your authorship now, because I think this moment that you're shifting and you left teaching and you don't want to correct papers, I think motivated you to write books
yeah.
to help, like you were helping the ski student, you're helping other teachers, beginning and experienced teachers, to be more efficient and still contribute. So tell me about your new book that's coming
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, so my new book that's coming out, Tori introduced it, but it's good grammar, joyful and affirming language lessons that work for more students.
Oh, well, wait a
And
second. Let's
yeah,
say good grammar, joyful. I don't know. I don't usually see good grammar and
and that's
joyful.
the and that is kind
Okay,
of the
teaching.
pun of
Okay,
it
so convince
is of
me.
course grammar that's trying to be good for kids. It's like
Okay.
it's a force for good because so many kids are hurt by grammar and language and
Yeah,
mechanics instruction,
yeah,
or frustrated with it, or just grow up to loathe it. And so many adults loathe
yeah.
it for that reason.
Still, right.
Yeah. No, Brock Hasseman, in a book called Grammar Alive, starts the book by saying that grammar is the skunk at the garden party of language
Oh
arts,
my
right?
God, I love
Uh,
that.
and, and
That's so
that's
true.
and that's hard. I mean, but what's funny is every syllable we say is grammar, and we already come preloaded with it, right? We already know it. I do a quick lesson with my students where I'll just like give them like a bunch of words, and I'll say, put these together in a sentence, and they put it together in a sentence. I'm like, how'd you do that? Did you know that that was an adjective that was the impacting that noun right there? Because I actually will give them a quiz beforehand. I'll be like, what's an adjective? And they're like, I have no idea. And I'm like, but you do have an idea. So anyhow, I mean, so the book is kind of tied to this like through line with the books. I think one of the big things I focus on is how do we do these things efficiently and effectively. And I think that there is a lot of time spent doing grammar because I don't know, we're supposed to do grammar or punk or whatever, and I think that there's a lot of wasted,
Yeah,
days and a lot of
right.
like frustration on the part of students and teachers. How come you can't learn this? We've been talking about what an
Right.
adjective is since second grade, and yet I
Yeah.
asked you, and 30% of the kids say or get it right? And so,
So teachers,
yeah.
I think it's about teachers teaching the grammar so that the students understand it. So is that what your book does? Or
Yeah,
what
so
I get in the book? What's
yeah,
joyful in this book?
the idea with the book is that it goes back to the very beginning. I kind of did research all the way back to grammar and language instruction in English kind of traces its roots back to Jonathan Swift of Gulliver's Travels wrote like a letter talking about how like terrible people in English were with grammar and how we had to create an academy like the French have to fix this whole thing. And that's like the moment. It's like that all of the grammar and language and rhetoric and usage books that we've kind of like branch off from that. And straight away he was like, it's the poets who are the problem. They keep making this like fun poetic stuff. Like, no, don't do that. We need to be proper about this. And so that notion of sort of just, like, and that's the good grammar sort of pun is like, like, the real thing is like, look, we all speak our own idiolect. We all have our own way of speaking that's beautiful, right? And you've learned it from your family and friends. And you've taken on language and meshed it together in this beautiful tapestry. And you already got that, right? So, what the book really talks about is that grammar and language instruction, to be effective, has to actually first be an exploration of self and your own grammar and language and a celebration of that, like a joyful, like, oh my God, you wouldn't believe what my uncle says. It's great. It's like my favorite saying, and I say it all the time. And celebrating the language of others because everyone's a little different on that. And then, going from there, using that base and framing it around like what the various things we learn can do for you, right? So you're not just learning a colon to learn a colon because you're supposed to know a colon.
Right.
You're learning a colon because it's a pause that adds emphasis, and we do that when we talk. I literally just did it 10 seconds ago, right?
Yes, I
Thinking
love
of it.
this. Okay,
Yeah,
I'm getting more convinced that
no.
you have shown a way that grammar can be integrated into the literacy program and work. So Traci, what do you think about this? What you're hearing Matt talk about?
I go back to my own days. I remember labeling parts of sentences in middle school and thinking, why in the world do I need to do this? Why do I need to know this? And I think our teachers back all those years ago didn't know why we needed to do it either. So it was a hard sell. There was no meaning for it for us, for kids to have to learn what an adjective is, what a verb is. And I think the secret that you've tapped into is that assigning meaning or showing kids meaning to grammar is going to make that so much more memorable and important and impactful for them because you've shown them why.
Yeah. And also the ability to transfer, right? It's like once you understand why we're doing this, then you can use it in your own writing, right? And that's the point, right? It's,
Yeah.
Well, that's why the professional development is so important. So I know you write blogs, and is that what you're writing about when you're a guest blogger or on your own blog? How does this get communicated to the teachers who are listening to this this philosophy, really, of approaching grammar in a different way?
I mean, the blog is just kind of my like, hey, I'm a teacher who's trying out some stuff, and this is what I'm doing. And then what I love about blogging is that like people, it's interactive, right? So somebody will try and be like, hey, I did this and try this, and I'm like, oh, that's much better. It's kind of like an idealized form in some ways of like what we would all kind of hope a teacher's launch to be, but it's often not, right? Of just sort of sharing ideas out there and then kind of interacting with people and connecting with them. And it's pretty rough draft stuff, right? It's not a book where it's edited. It's just
like this, teacher to teacher.
Here's what I tried this week, right? Take it or leave it. But that's useful, right? It's like finding that lesson on the copier and you're like, oh, I'll use this and this, not that. That's not so much me.
I know. I love that. So I know this is the new book, but I do want to give a shout out to the flash feedback because that is really about saving teachers time. And that's where the correcting of the papers and all of that. So can you just give me a bit about what's behind the flash feedback? Why did you write it? What's one tip that people can hear right now that they could actually do? And then Traci, I'm going to have you weigh in on that too, about how to give feedback, because that's where it all falls down in literacy is correcting papers and bringing the bag of papers home and back and forth. So
I think
update.
there's two things that drive why I wrote it. I mean, besides, and they're kind of both wrapped up in my own experiences with it. Which one of them is I use this example at the beginning of the book. The first English journal, the preeminent English language arts journal of all time, starts out on the first page. It's literally the cover, and it's like, "Can good composition teaching be taught under current circumstances?" This is in 1912, and then it has in big letters, "No," like
No.
one, as its own paragraph. And the idea is that, like, and the author goes on to be like, "Look, I have almost 100 students. Can you imagine that?" And I have to respond to all of them. And I'm like, I would love 100 students. I've never had 100. I always have 150, 160. 100 would be amazing. But he's not wrong. Even at like 100 kids or like students, like that's, if I take 10 minutes per student, that's 1,000 minutes. And that breaks down to, like however many hours, right? And that's if I'm doing, like 10 minutes, which is pretty quick for going through a paper,
Right,
right?
right.
And the second thing is that a huge amount of feedback is actually either unread or or actually like harmful. So it's either ineffective or it's harmful. A
Yes.
massive amount of it is because feedback is just information. Students can choose not to take the information. They can choose not to read it. And oftentimes we set ourselves up for trouble when we like hand it back at the end of the class, at the end of a unit, and say, "Take a look at this." Like, even kind of with best
Right.
intentions, it
How
doesn't tend to
effective
have.
is the feedback? Right.
Yeah. Yeah,
After all
because
the
do we
time.
learn things that you don't look at? No, right? And do you learn things that you look at once for a quick second and move on from? No, right? So in terms of like the maybe kind of quick top three, the title flash feedback comes from the idea that we shouldn't just give feedback to like a big paper once every couple months when we're able to actually like stomach that. It should be a regular part of class. So having
Okay.
short feedback that focuses on like one thing as a regular part of class is really important. Another thing the book talks about is the importance of not reading everything and not responding to everything, that even 1 minute on the scale of 150 kids is 2.5 hours. So, and what we will do is we will stop assigning writing or we'll kill ourselves trying to keep up with it. And the kids should be
Right.
writing a ton every day, right? Or it doesn't, and this is true for all subjects, right? They should be doing a ton of math every day. They should be in art, drawing, all the things, all the time,
Yes, yes. There's
more than
not
we
enough
could ever take a
time.
look at.
Yeah.
And so that's really, an important thing. And then the last thing is this idea of a feedback cycle where you come back to feedback. If you take the time, if I'm going to take that time, that 10 minutes per student that, equates to 25 hours of my time, if I'm going to do that, they have to come back and keep using it. They got to record it. They have to use it for a final draft. It should come in like a formative stage so they can use it in a final draft. They should use it to set goals the next time. They should reflect on it at the end of the quarter. It needs to become a part of the class, because that's, feedback can be super powerful, and that's information that's like directly for them, and they don't get that much. It's also a place to build connection, to build relationships. It's
Yes,
one of the most
yes.
powerful.
I love the
We
way you're
we do
talking
that.
about that. Yes, because
Yeah.
teachers are busy, and what you're saying is we need to be more thoughtful and clear about why are we giving this feedback? How
Yeah.
effective is it? And where do we want to choose to give it? So it's
Yeah.
more intentional from what you're saying. I want to have you weigh in on all of this, Traci. How is this relating to your experience of teaching?
Well, I enjoyed listening to Matt talk about feedback, and in my mind I'm hearing what he's saying, and I'm aware of the fact that we teach at different developmental levels as well. So typically I'm working with kindergarten through 5th grade. I'm trying to imagine what it would be like to have 150 students at a time and have to give feedback, probably primarily through written feedback. In an elementary classroom, my go-to vehicle of choice is conferencing and conversation. I feel for the level that I'm teaching, currently 4th grade, that the most meaningful way that I can deliver a message to them is to sit and look for 5 minutes at a piece of writing once a week with one of my 25 students, which is very feasible. It's much more feasible than taking home a stack of 25 journals at the end of the week and overdoing the written feedback so that none of it really enters into their consciousness. I found that when I sit with a child and along the lines of the great Carl Anderson, just asking kids, how is it going? How are you feeling about your writing? And hearing where they take that conversation helps for me to gauge how much they're willing to take in right now. If I have a struggling student who says, it's going okay, I'm going to listen to them read their piece. I'm going to listen to the one thing that they think they did well. I'm going to listen to the one thing that they're aware of, that they might be aware of, although there might be 20 different things they need to work on, that they have recognized as something they need to work on. And we're going to have a conversation about it. And I'm going to provide some guided feedback or show them exactly what I mean with examples so that they can bring that back to the table in their writing, and they can apply that wherever they need to apply that. I've found that picking too many things to work on with a young child is overwhelming and shuts them down. If I say, okay, we have to work on your grammar, we have to work on your spelling, we have to work on your descriptive writing, that's not getting through to them. It has to be student driven. It has to be, I feel, accompanied by a strong recognition of what makes good writing and pointing that out to children in mini lessons daily. I really enjoy peer conferencing and teaching children how to conference. A lot of times, depending on, I mean, I've done this with first graders, second graders, all the way through to fifth graders, just having a group of kids listen to acknowledge something that they think a peer did well in their writing, and then coming up with one question or suggestion for them to bring back in revising their writing.
I love
Kids,
this.
when they have that tool, when they're taught
Yeah.
how to conference with each other, a group of 3 or 4 of us can sit in front of the entire class and have a peer conference, and the rest of the children are seeing what it looks like to engage this way. A lot of times after a small group peer conference, I'll have kids on a little sticky note write the one thing that they really appreciated about the kids' writing that they shared. Usually they echo a lot of my language and what they've heard me teach as good writing, which
So
is
they're
great.
mimicking you. This is
They are
good.
mimicking me,
Teaching. They're becoming
and
the teachers.
and
So,
my students will hear it more clearly from their peers than they will from me.
so
So
both of
after a
you,
while.
yeah. So both you and Matt. So I'm glad you brought up the verbal feedback and the peer conferencing. Matt, I'm sure that relates to your experience as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, Traci, we should have co-written the book, because I mean, you hit upon all of the like really important things, right? Conferencing is essential, right? Like sitting down, and again, at a secondary level, the logistics of it are tricky, and it takes a lot of time, but it's so
Right.
worth it, right?
But
Like
it's
that human
planning.
to human.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
because that's where you help them to understand how understand the feedback. Because if it's just written, they can take it any number of ways. You can also
yes,
understand
yes.
where they're at. You also mentioned this idea of like focusing on like one thing or a few things, but and I think in the book I talk about there's this notion of a detached authority, which is like sometimes we feel like which is like you mark everything, right? All of the wrong
Mhm.
answer. You're essentially a Scantron machine that marks all the wrong things versus like the interested reader that sits down and looks at a kid and says, what does this kid need right now? They're in fourth grade, right? Or they're in
Yeah.
10th grade, but they still have time, right? What, and we have a bunch of, so what do they need right now to move forward? Because too much feedback is essentially no feedback, right? It just kind of is too much at the same time. And then the idea of peer, right? Like peer response, you have to teach kids how to do it. They can't, at least at the secondary level, it's a very fraught process. Between the sort of like social dynamics of like, like, am I going to come across as too mean, too nice, too smart, too, not smart enough? And also just the fact that by at least the secondary level, a lot of them might kind of feel like, well, the teacher has all the knowledge. And so what can you tell me? But you can train them out of that, right? Like writing centers do this across the country. So I often feel like you elementary folks are way ahead of us secondary folks
Oh,
when
thank
it
you.
goes down to.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, there
So
are systems and protocols. I
yeah.
want to give Traci a chance to highlight her story as well, because it fits in with this conversation that you had selected for week 18 in the book. When I started teaching, I wish I had known, because the conversation that you're having with students really relates to teachers as well. We can't mentor them for 10 things. We have to pick one. I write about mentoring. We have to find a way to give feedback verbally. We can't just teacher evaluation in writing. So as you were talking, I was hearing, how do we support our teaching force and the people that are listening to even this show that might not even relate to literacy, but they're hearing it as a learner. So Traci, your story was get help when you need it. Why did you write that story?
I think it was probably one of the most important things I have learned in 26 years is how to ask for help. Again, it came out of necessity because I didn't know how to do all parts of my job effectively. So I knew that in order to sink or swim, I had to make some changes. And that's when I sought out the professionals around me to share their knowledge with me. There was already so much knowledge there right at my fingertips. I just had to feel comfortable enough to be vulnerable to say to my colleagues, I don't know about this. Is there anything you can offer from your knowledge to help me understand this a bit better? And I think that applies to every relationship you have in a school, whether it's the custodian or the secretary in the front office. I think having that vulnerable relationship with the people you work with makes people want to share with you what they already know. I think having the comfort level to be able to ask for help is not always easy, especially for younger teachers, because they think they don't have the confidence always yet to recognize that even teachers who have been teaching for 26 years don't have all the answers. And we are still asking for help, and we are still looking for more information, because that is the key. Relying and leaning on the people around you is the key to learning within that environment.
And that's why we have this podcast,
Love
Teacher
it.
Teacher. So this has been a very inspiring and dynamic conversation about literacy, but it's also illustrates the importance of us just talking with each other and sharing our unique experiences and really recreating the passion of being a teacher. So we're going to wind down the podcast with two questions. One is, I'm always curious about, what do you do to maintain your balance, to sustain yourself as a human? Matt, how do you get away from all the writing and the blogging and all the other stuff that teachers have to do all day long? What works for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that forces my hand is my kids. One of the things I love about having
Okay.
kids is it forces you to get down on the ground. And I love an excuse to build some Legos, or like get out like the Play-Doh and build something. Like I love that. But I mean, I also think that, like, in terms of like pursuits, I don't know if I consciously did this, but I feel like I pursued things where, like, I do believe that, like, I have a hard time turning off the teacher thing. Every article I read, I'm like, oh, could that be a good, like, mentor
We
text,
all
right?
do, yes.
Yeah, and so, the two big things are, I really love gardening. I have a massive, sprawling garden, and when I'm out there, that just disappears. Some people maybe think or listen to things on their earphones while they're gardening. I'm just like listening to like the hum of the summer, and like looking at, like, very intently at like the soil and the plants, and like kind of like interacting, and I just completely get lost in it. And then the other thing is just kind of completely opposite, but I feel like the same, is I like both skiing and surfing, so depending on the season. And it's the same thing. Like, I just disappear into both of those
I love
pursuits.
that. And I'm
Yeah.
glad you're surfing when you were one block away and you couldn't do it. So now
I did
you're
have a few days I picked it up, so
all
it's very,
right,
yeah.
good. All right. And what about you, Traci? What's a nugget, something that you do or are currently doing that's kind of special that takes you away from all of this?
Well, I also enjoy gardening. So I'm starting to see a trend and thinking maybe we're on to something, and that gardening should be a part of pre-service teacher education,
I love
because
it. Growing, we're growing.
it definitely is my escape from reality when the weather is nice. I will admit that I do a better job of taking care to nourish my well-being now than I did as a new teacher. Um, my upbringing turned me into the type of person that I thought I just have to suck it up and continue to do what sometimes made me unhappy because I was working those 5 hours a night after school at my kitchen table. It took me a long time to recognize that in order to be the best person that I could be, the best mother I could be, the best teacher I could be, that putting that work away and taking care of the other parts of my life would help me to be better at all of those things.
Yeah.
In fact, it wasn't until a few years ago that I rediscovered my love of writing. I knew I had that in me, but until a few years ago, I rediscovered my love of writing. I was going through some personal changes in my life, which led me to join an online dating site. And my experiences there were so ridiculous and funny that I began writing a personal narrative about those
I can't wait to
experiences.
read that one. Everybody is listening. We want to know
Yeah,
about that. So writing, even though you're teaching writing, you're taking it at a different level. One thing that I like to do for people that know me when I do workshops online is I'm a yoga teacher and I like to do hand mudras, hand yoga, and I integrate them into my workshops and classes. And sometimes at the end of the session, people will say, that's the part that I like the best. But part of it, like, let's just do it now. You tuck your thumbs in and wrap your fingers around and lay it on your lap and just inhale and exhale and drop our shoulders and do it one more time. Inhale and exhale. Just a pause, a little pause like that can shift our energy. And that's the way I have to come back to reality and be more clear about what my next activity. So I encourage our listeners to look for hand mudras online and integrate them into their own lives and school days. So we're going to let's do the advice, and then we're going to go over to Tori for a summary. So bottom line, one message for all our listeners. What would you like to say that would inspire them, give them joy, or just make them understand that the challenges can go away? Matt, what do you think?
I think just treating your time as like an incredibly precious resource. I very quickly, like I heard this like interview years ago with former President Obama's photographer who messed up something. And Obama was basically stuck like sitting there for like half an hour, like not able to do anything. And he went home and he's like, I just wasted the most precious resource on earth. Like I spent like half an hour of a president's time can like get like a bill like passed or get like a $100 million to an organization, and he like was racked with guilt with this afterwards. And then Obama was having some fun with it, and like it ended up being okay, right? But like I think that like look, I think we're not like necessarily the president, but I do think that like teachers have so many things that press upon their time. And so many, and look, it's not just the teaching thing, right? It's also the fact that, people have families, right? They have pursuits. They have a wonderful novel about an ancestor in the 1600s, right? That these things are incredibly important too. And so I think a lot of things that we do when we're teaching are things that we feel like we're supposed to do, or, getting back to feedback, like things that are almost more about like marketing and PR, like looking like you're doing the job than actually doing the important thing. And so I think just being really thoughtful about that idea of like, treat your time as a really precious resource, because it is, right? And it's finite. And so we have to be really thoughtful about that.
And that's that intention that I talked about. And that's part of that yoga practice and the meditation and the mindfulness and all the pieces that we were talking about earlier is what's our intention? Like what are we looking to do? Traci, what's your wisdom?
My wisdom is be gentle with yourself. People expect a lot from teachers, students, parents, administration, that we sometimes hold ourselves, I believe, to unrealistic heights, expectations. We need to be gentler with ourselves because we're not perfect, and we learn from the fumbles and the misses, and that just continues to help us grow and to learn.
So Tori, what are your big takeaways for our listeners. How are you going to pull this down to a summary?
I love this conversation. You guys hit on so many different things that also came together in such beautiful ways. Really interesting to me to hear, Traci, that you always wanted to be a teacher. I actually really relate to your story of, playing like you graded papers as a kid, because I did the same thing, and actually did grade a lot of papers. My mom was a fifth grade teacher, and there were times that she would just hand me the stack of papers and the answer key, and I loved, writing
Here we
good
go.
job and yay,
I
things like
love
that.
it.
Loved it. So I get that, but I
Tori,
also really appreciate Matt's story too, about his sort of path, and like this, like it took him some time to get there, and I think that just is a really nice testament to both of you, and that you had clear goals, or you didn't have clear goals, and you just kind of had to figure it out on your way. And I think that's part of this podcast, is about how we are always learning and continuing our learning. I also loved how you both shared your ideas around feedback, and that synergy there was really cool. Like Matt, you even said it, like maybe Traci should have co-authored flash feedback, because a lot of the things I heard her talking about, I was sitting here like, oh yeah, I read that in the book, when I've read that in flash feedback. So it's cool just to see how good teaching and good instructional practice suits kids at all ages, right? And actually suits teachers too, because you've both come to this understanding of what it means to sit down with a kid and talk face to face about writing, and you've seen the impact that can have. So that's really beautiful to see how you both have had that sort of epiphany and learning in your teaching journey. But I also really want to call attention to the wisdom that you both just dropped at the end, because I think if nothing else comes of this conversation, I think teachers need to hear those messages about honoring your time, respecting your time, finding ways to make it less arduous to be a teacher is really important. And Traci, showing yourself grace, but nobody's perfect. And if you were perfect, life would be boring, right? So, learning from those bumps along the way, and things will pass. I think those are really important messages for our listeners to hear. So I thank you both. This was a really great conversation. Appreciate you.
So I'm going to end this episode for all our listeners with one of my favorite authors. I'm going to stick with the mindfulness theme, because it seems like intention and clarity has been a focus, and hand mudras and pausing. So John Kabat-Zinn, he wrote a book called Wherever You Go, There You Are. And he's also responsible for many programs in mindfulness and meditations at the UMass Medical Center, where our health and well-being really is at risk if we don't focus on our time and take care of ourselves and not beat ourselves up so much. So you can, our listeners can find videos of him, and I encourage you to do it. So here's something that he said. He said, instead of saying, let it go, we should probably say, let it be. And I want to thank you all the listeners, beginning teachers, experienced teachers. Thanks for listening to Teacher to Teacher. Until we meet again, bye for now.
Thanks, everyone, for joining today's Teacher to Teacher conversation. We hope this time together energized you, inspired you, and reminded you why you chose to become a teacher. You can purchase any of Carol's books and any books mentioned in the podcast online at www.corwin.com. Please leave a review and share this podcast with your colleagues. Thank you for listening to the Corwin Teacher to Teacher podcast, a place to share teacher wisdom and engage in authentic conversations with experienced educators.
Come explore Corwin's free New Teacher Toolkit and resources. We've curated these resources based on extensive research from teachers, coaches, and principals alike. Whether you are brand new or a veteran teacher, find ready-to-go teaching tools at corwin.com today.